Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues with Rabbi Chaim Coffman from the Holy Land. Welcome back, Rabbi. How are you today? Oh. Now I'm trying to decide if I need to unmute you yet. Hold on. Okay.
Hopefully.
All right, there you go. I've got to get a screen configured here while I introduce and get you rocking and rolling on this topic. So I'll just switch it over to here. I'll just pass it on to you now. So controversial issues, always with this controversial rabbi. What do you do it for, man? If a person is not in the
Don't
right,
smoke crack. Come on, you missed the line.
if a person is not in the right mind, is it still considered sin? Are they held accountable? You're crazy, dude. In a good way. We love you, man. We love you. That's all I know.
Imagine what would happen if people hated me. I'd be look a lot worse. I'd be shut down on Facebook 10 times instead of twice.
That's funny. Crazy, man. All right, dude. Well, take it away. It is all yours.
Okay, it's a pleasure to be here. Again, there's no holidays back into the everyday. So I'm going to hit, I think, an interesting topic, which I'm not sure 100% when I get through the whole thing because we started late and whatever. We'll see how much I'm able to get through. There's an issue, obviously, someone who has a mental issue, right? Whether it's depression, whether it's schizophrenia, whether it's it's being bipolar, etc. A person can have serious mental issues, and the question's going to be, what's their liability? What, or let's say they cause damage, or they do something. A, what's their liability? And B, even before we get the liability, are they liable for anything? In other words, if someone, is in the state of depression, how can they serve God? We're going to have to speak about, the obligations of God, what the obligations are in general, and where someone holding, because in general, what could we say? Person doesn't always feel like, this will be more my Hasidic side here coming out. Person doesn't necessarily want to sing and dance so much. I mean, it's easy on Simchas Torah, it's a little bit easier on Sukkot. We have great joy, whatever, but sometimes, we get up, we have to sleep, we have to go pray, we do things by rote. Sometimes we just don't feel like eating, 35 pounds of matzah in 25 seconds. You have to whistle Dixie, right? That's a little bit hard to do. So on a regular basis, it has nothing to do with depression. A person can just be sad, can just be whatever under pressure. Doesn't have to necessarily do with depression, but it could be that, they got bills to pay. They don't know where money's coming from, other problems, family issues, spousal issue, kids issues, who knows? There could be so many different things going on that a person is not in a proper mental state. Now, when it comes to prayer, doesn't really matter, right? Really, you shouldn't pray if you're sad. We're not really going to go down that path. But in general, we hold that mitzvahs don't need kavanah. Mitzvahs do not need intention. So by certain things, you need minimal intention. Person says the Shema, the first line of the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Everyone agrees you need proper intention. Right? You can't just be thinking about, ice cream or who knows what. You got to be thinking God is one, past, present, and future. God, knows the thoughts of man. God intervenes in history, right? If I didn't have intention for any part of the rest of the prayer, taking on the yoke of mitzvahs, reward and punishment, the last paragraph about tzitzis, I still fulfill my obligation. By the Shmona Esrei, the first three paragraphs, I have to understand at least what I'm saying. The very least. If I didn't have intention for the rest of it, I fulfill my obligation. Coffman's language, you got probably a C-, right? If you're lucky, maybe a D+, right? But certain things, that you do need a certain level of intention. Now, most things I don't have intention. It's not good. I didn't have intention. I fulfill my obligation. But again, even if we're not, so busy in our minds, taxed with all kinds of other things, I still have to go and do the mitzvahs. Right, but what happens? A person going through a trauma, person has difficulty, person sad, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be, depression over here. So there are certain ways we're gonna discuss a little bit of background, at least what some of these mental health issues may be, and then how to look at it from a Torah perspective. So there's a book out there, 5th edition. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder. Right? For example, 5 out of 9 9 symptoms that are listed there, right? For, let's say, for depression, right? We'll mention depression here because that happens to a lot of people. It could happen because of something that they went through. It could happen because of a chemical imbalance. It could be, many different things over here. And there are a number of things that can warrant a diagnosis of depression. And they can include depressed mood, diminished interest, in pleasure, in most activities, change in sleep habits, a number of things, right? That could lead to a psychologist saying this person has depression. Now, the main thing here, what we're going to say is, we'll cut to the chase, but we're going to give a lot of background. And that is, the point is you have to look at every single case individually, right? You have to understand. They have to ask a lot of questions. They have to see where you're coming from. They have to see if these things apply. If they don't apply, there's no blanket rule, right? Just because someone has certain symptoms doesn't mean someone else does, right? But it has to be done on an individual basis. This is pretty crucial. So the Gemara also ends, an appreciation for what? For internal experience, right? It's not just about, what we do, right? Actions are important. I don't think there's any question, right? But the question is, how are they done? Why are they done? Person can do things for any number of different reasons. Some person we're going to see, I don't know if we're going to get to it. We'll see. You speak about someone who's got OCD, right? Someone, who's is diagnosed with that, and they're always afraid, right? They're always afraid, did I fulfill the mitzvah? I didn't fulfill the mitzvah, right? Meaning obsessive compulsive disorder, right? Sometimes someone gets so caught up in different things, they wash their hands 100 times. Maybe I didn't use enough water. Maybe I didn't have enough attention. Maybe this, right? We use that as an example, right? But there are two things here. First of all, there's what's going on inside. Is what, why a person's doing something. That has to be analyzed. And the other thing is, exactly what are they doing? Now, you're going to say, how can we analyze what someone's doing? How can we really know what's going on inside? Well, that would be the job, of a psychologist, to get behind, inside the person's, what we'll say in their kishkes, inside them, to understand what they're going through. And then by understanding what they're going through, they can make a diagnosis. Now, somebody could do certain things. Maybe they're doing it for, a certain reason, a precise reason, a rational reason. And to another person, for them doing this action, totally out of the ordinary, right? So how do we view it? We cannot view it 100% the same by each person. Now, you tell me, by a Jew, keeping Torah and mitzvahs. We all have to keep Torah and mitzvahs, right? We have to understand to the best of our ability why we're doing what we're doing. Some will understand more, some will understand less. But again, in the normal realm, and the rabbis also understood the psyche of man. We do what we call according to the majority. Just because someone does something and that's outside of the majority, we don't necessarily take what they do seriously. Not only that, we cannot say Jewish law goes like such a person because it doesn't go according to the majority. Now, the majority over here means the majority for good. That's Exodus chapter 23, verse 2. That we say you got to go according to the majority in a court of rabbinic law, right? In a rabbinical court. So you have 3 judges, 2 against 1, wins. Even if that one judge, is an absolute expert, and he's greater than the other 2. Doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter at all. We spoke about that, a little bit, when we spoke about why a convert can't be a rabbinic court judge. So we mentioned, 2 against 1, you go according to the majority. Now, if someone, whether they think they're on a higher level, or not, then they do things not according to the norm. Doesn't necessarily mean they're mentally unstable. But the reality is we don't go what some people do. We go according to what the majority say, right? Again, we're talking for the good. There are different ways to account for that, to know, what the majority of people do, or whether some are just taking on a stringency, or it's really the main part of the law. It depends. Again, it's going to depend on the case, what it is. But in general, someone does something that nobody else does, people are going to look at them funny. Now again, it could be maybe they do have some sort of mental health issue, or maybe they're just doing something, different according to everyone else. Right? It'll depend on the case. That's why, as we said before, it's crucial, it's important to analyze each circumstance, each case on a case-by-case basis. There's no possible way to say, okay, this behavior, this is the norm, whatever, and we're going to say across the board. There's no such thing in this case as across the board. You have to take it for each individual. For some people, they may be doing the right thing for themselves. For other people, maybe a case of mental health issue. Could be any number of things, but you have to look at it on each case. Right? So there is a debate. There is a debate among psychologists today, right? You have to be aware of the patient's background. That's also pretty crucial. You don't just go in and start asking them, a million questions without taking the person's background, into account over here. So therefore, you have to respect them, obviously. We'll speak about that at the end if we get there. And you have to look out for symptoms that suggest something is wrong. So basically, someone's going to go to speak to somebody, and they're going to tell them, what's bothering them or what's going on, or someone else may explain it for them, whatever the case may be. And the psychologist is going to sit there and listen, and they're going to ask questions. But again, what are they going to take into account? They're going to take into account what halacha says. They're going to take into account where the person is holding, what they've been through, what their background is. Now, just because they've been through something doesn't necessarily mean because of their background it happened. It could happen for any number of reasons. But the background and how they grew up, how their parents dealt with them, how they dealt with peer pressure, other things, these are going to be crucial issues. These are absolutely going to be crucial issues. And a psychologist, if they're worth their weight, whatever they charge, if they're going to be worth the money you're paying, they are going to find out soup to nuts where a person came from, what their background is, and now to see what they're going through, if it's according to the norm or not. Now, I'll make one other statement, and that is that, a person also involved, that's why it's important, if you're talking about, an Orthodox Jew, they should go to somebody that understands the Orthodox community, right? Meaning that it's a psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever, that they themselves are religious, or they understand the ins and outs of the Orthodox community. Because a person could have, quote unquote, normal behavior. They go to a secular psychologist or, a Jewish secular psychologist or a non-Jew, and they're going to say this is not normal. You have to break all these habits. You have to go against what they're telling you. You're being brainwashed and all that. You don't need that, right? You need that like you need 4 heads or 2 heads or whatever, right? The point is they're going to lead you in the wrong direction. You need somebody, that, first of all, they know what they're doing, that's for sure, but they have to understand your background. Then they have to understand, obviously, what's going on in the Jewish community and what's going on in the Orthodox Jewish community. Because if not, it's a recipe for disaster, right? They'll convince you this isn't normal. You're going to get normal sleep. What are you learning so much? It's all esoteric. It doesn't mean anything. Go according to what, other people do, etc. They will ruin the person, right? They'll absolutely try to ruin the person. So obviously, you need someone with similar background. Not only similar background, they have to know the ins and outs of the Orthodox community. Now, does that mean they're going to be a world expert in Jewish law? Doesn't necessarily mean that, but they should know enough of the ropes to understand what's normative behavior in the Orthodox community, and what's obsessive compulsive, right? It's one thing we understand. Person gets up in the morning, he's going to wash his hands 3 times, right? He's got water in his cup. In this cup, he's going to wash once, twice, right? Whatever. He's going to go to the bathroom. He's going to say a blessing coming out of the bathroom. He's going to wash his hands again. All this. But, okay, we understand that. That's the norm. But if someone is sitting there 10 minutes, and they keep washing their hands. They're not sure they're totally clean. They're not sure they totally clean them. They totally cleanse themselves and all that. And they keep doing it like that, or they're making a blessing. We're going to see, let's say they make a blessing. They're not sure they said God's name right. They're not sure they had the proper intention. So they say it again, or they say it a third time, or they say it a fourth time. But you're going to say, according to Jewish law, if you said it once, you fulfill your obligation. We don't just go around saying God's name, right? It's one of the 10 commandments. Even non-Jews should be liable. You don't say God's name for no reason. That's taking God's name in vain, right? It's either saying God's name where it's not needed, or you make a blessing you don't need. Whatever the case is, that's not the norm. You're not making a blessing half a dozen times. Thinking, did I fulfill my obligation? Didn't I fulfill my obligation? Washing my hands, did they turn blue? And I'm making sure there's nothing on them. There's no chatzitza. There's no barrier between, my skin and the water. My hands are totally clean, and I'm looking. Like, okay, that's overkill, right? That's obsessive. You do it once, you do it twice, you do it 3 times, however many times it is, right? When you wake up and then when you wash your hands, any other time. Okay, that's the norm. But you're not sitting there washing for 10 minutes. You're not worrying, did I fulfill my obligation in prayer? I didn't fulfill my obligation in prayer. It takes you 20 minutes just to say the first line of Shema Yisrael. Okay, there's a normative way of doing things, give or take. And the person who's giving the advice, they have to know this. Is that the norm? Someone's going to say the Shema half a dozen times. With all this intention or whatever, and they're not sure. They know what the norms are, right? They should be well versed in the norms. Because if they're not, they're going to say, "What are you doing?" They're not going to know any better. They're going to say, "Okay, so say it 6 times. What's the big deal?" That doesn't mean obsessive compulsive over here. Say it till you get it right. Whatever. But they're not helping you. That's the point. They're not helping you over here. They're just sort of egging you on, right? They'll take you down the wrong path. Now, so that's by way of introduction, that the psychologists have to understand, where the person's coming from, right? In other words, their religious background and their background in general and how they grew up and all that. That they have to know. Now, if you look at halachic literature, now what does halachic literature do in this case? What does halachic literature do? It tries to assess the circumstances carefully. You don't make a judgment unless you understand 100% what's going on, right? Let's say 2 litigants come to rabbinical court. They have a dispute. So the rabbinical court's going to ask all kinds of questions. They're going to bring in witnesses. They're going to make sure before they give any psak, before they give any answer, who's liable or who's not. At the end of the day, they want to hear the testimony. They want to understand, 100% what the circumstances are before they're going to give an answer, right? Before they're going to give a psak, a ruling of law, right? Because they're going to ask over here, is the circumstantial reality, is it relevant to the question, right? In other words, what I have over here is it just some, high in the sky type of idea? It's not really practical, etc. Or is it practical? What are the ramifications? What did the person do? What did they say? What do the witnesses say? They're going to carefully examine every nook and cranny before they decide, who gets what or who has to pay or all that. Now, there's another thing going over here. There's what we call the action itself, what we call the Maisa mitzvah. Means the action I did, right? I shook the lulav, I ate the matzah, right? I prayed, whatever it is, I did an action, right? I did an action. Now, that corresponds to what we call the formulation of the idea, right? In other words, what we call kiyuma mitzvah, the idea of what the mitzvah is. So there's a difference. There's a difference of what I think the mitzvah is and what the actual mitzvah is doing. Right, and what exactly the case is over here. So if a person, what does that mean? What does that mean for us? So someone who's not in touch with reality, if they're not in touch with reality, they cannot do mitzvahs properly. Right, someone who's considered out of his mind, i.e. what we call a shoita, they don't if you give them money, they just throw it away. Not just they gamble, they don't know how to handle it. They just, they rip it up, they throw it away, something like that. Someone who has that status, they're not obligated to mitzvahs unless they're lucid, right? The reason is because they don't have any idea what they're doing, right? So somebody, let's say, there are mental illnesses that have periods of time where one is lucid, right? And one is, let's say, they're not. Someone, let's say, is schizophrenic, right? If they're schizophrenic, even if they're on medication or they don't have the right medication or they have the right dosage of medication, whatever it is, and they're clinically termed positive symptoms. What do I mean positive symptoms? They hallucinate. They're delusional, right? But, so they're doing things that make no sense. And that can come up when they're under stress, right? And they can just be gone mentally for a long time until they're brought back down to this world. Most likely through medication and through therapy. Now, if that is the case, then there's the other side, right? There are negative symptoms can also be observed. Let's say apathy, lack of pleasure, emotion. We're very emotional. People in general can be very emotional unless the person tries to bury that emotion. But in general, some people more emotional, less emotional. But the code of Jewish law, also recognizes this. Now, let's analyze. Let's analyze for a second. Most of us could say, most Orthodox Jews could say at some point, maybe during the day, this great rabbi once told me, he's also a psychologist, go through 75 mood swings, an hour, right? We go up and down, up and down, up and down, right? For an hour. So in general, we could be what? We could be apathetic. We could be angry. We could be happy. We could be, we could go back and forth, bounce around like a yo-yo, with our emotional state. So, as we understand, we mentioned earlier in the code of Jewish law, the rabbis understood, in general, mitzvahs do not need intention. Because if every mitzvah needed so much intention, we wouldn't be able to do anything. Most mitzvahs we wouldn't be able to do. As we mentioned, the certain mitzvahs do need certain level of intention. But if I didn't have intention in doing other things, right? So what happens? So I still get credits. I get maybe, a B or B minus, Coffman's law, maybe a C plus. We'll give you a C plus, but you fulfill your obligation. But everybody could make that claim, right? Every Orthodox Jew could say, I'm not in the mood to pray today. I got 2 hours of sleep. I'm half asleep. Let me sleep another few hours, right? And, maybe I'll pray then, or I'll pray later, or, I'll pray when I'm in the mood. What's the problem with that mentality? First of all, it's wrong anyway. But what's the problem? The problem is the person will say, I'll pray when I need to pray. When I'm in desperate need, I'll pray. So if everything's going good, even if I got a few hours of sleep, imagine a person got a few hours of sleep because they were up late making a multi-million-dollar deal, right? So of course they're gonna go to sleep very happy. They just made a ton of money. So once they made a ton of money, what's gonna be? They'll say, I'll sleep longer. God will understand. I'll give more to charity, right? I'm much better off now. Just, I was up for hours. I was up for 15 hours sealing this deal, right? So what? God's going to have it against me? I'm going to give more charity. Let's say that's true. Person's going to give more charity now. They made a lot more money. So isn't God going to understand that I'm not going to get up early to pray? Or maybe I won't, at least pray in the morning. I'll pray in the afternoon. I'll make it up. Whatever the case is. God said, I don't care. I don't care. Shut up and eat the matzah. That's what you got to do. You got 2 hours of sleep. You got 5 hours of sleep. You made a lot of money. You didn't make a lot of money. So what? But according to this, a person could still be apathetic. They could be apathetic. They could lack pleasure, right? Or they're just too tired. Maybe they're too tired. They had a late night. Other things going on. They're under stress. They're under stress. They say, you know what? I'll sleep a little bit later. I'll sleep a little bit later because I have to chill. And I have to relax. Well, doesn't God want me to pray when I'm in a happy state? God doesn't want me to pray when I'm sad. Very true. But at the same time, how many people are in such an ecstatic state when they pray in the morning? Right? We say every day, men say every day, got an obligation to serve God with great joy. But you're half asleep. You didn't have coffee. You don't drink coffee, because if you did, probably kill people, in my case. So I don't drink coffee. Okay, so, get up early. You go to synagogue, you got to wake yourself up. But if you think about what's going on, you're standing in front of the king, you think about the awesomeness of what we're doing. Person can get in the mood, right? Even, doesn't matter where you are. Doesn't matter where you're holding. But we can say that about anybody. Right? But here, we're talking about something very specific. Here, we're talking about clinically termed negative symptoms. It's not just a person had a long night. Person, had a bad day. Okay. They're mentally healthy. It's going to take them a while to come out of it. Whatever it is. So God says, you know what? Even in that state, you're going to have to fix yourself up. I don't care how you do it. And you got to go pray. Right, that's what you got to do. But someone who's clinically termed over here, different issue. Right, it's not just they had a bad day or whatever. It's a much more serious issue. Right, so so again, what are we talking about? We're talking about somebody who's, between this world and the next. Meaning, sometimes they're really lucid. Other times, they're hallucinating. Right, so what do you do? So what do you do in such a case? So only when the person is lucid, that's when they can do the mitzvah. That's when he fulfills his obligation. But a person, in this case, is not always categorized permanently in Jewish law, right? If someone is mentally ill. But they can be categorized circumstantially based on what they can or can't do. So now, when we're talking about that, the experience of it is going to be different for every single person, right? Even if it's the same illness. So I'll give one example. One example that I know about. There are a number of examples. I'll give one. I know someone who had a conversion many years ago, and the conversion is questionable. The rabbis that did it, very questionable. So they wanted this person been religious for, I don't know, 25 years, more, probably more than that. In any case, this person has mental health issues. He has mental health issues, but he's been a religious Jew for, I don't know, 25, 30 years, something like that. So I asked my Rebbe, so what do you do? The person's keeping Torah mitzvahs. The guy learns, but he's got issues. 100%. It's not me. He has mental issues. Nothing to talk about. So if he's got mental issues, what do you do about conversion? So he told me when he's lucid, when he's in his right mind, and everything's, and he's totally lucid, that's when you run into the basement. That's when you take him to the rabbinical court. But you tell me, why convert him? Right? That's what I would have said. Why convert him? Problem. Right? He's schizophrenic. Right? Or he's got mental issues, whatever. I don't think he's schizophrenic. He's got other issues. Whatever it is. Right? So if that's the case, we don't need a Jew like, why do we need a Jew like that? Okay, we got enough problems in our own community. Why should we take him? Because if he's already been this way for so long, and he's been religious his whole life, then okay. We understand he's got issues, but when he doesn't have these issues, he keeps Torah mitzvahs, right? So the psak was, right? What did my Rebbe tell me? So he says, when this person is lucid, then you take him to the rabbinical court. So I know somebody took him to a rabbinical court, and this guy started, talking all kinds of garbage, hallucinations and this and that. They threw him out. They threw him out. So the rabbi that took him came back to me. And I said, when he's lucid and he's in his right mind, that's when you take him. But this person talked, and he started going on and on. This rabbi didn't realize what state of mind he was in. And he started talking, and the basis said, we're not going to deal with this guy. This guy's a nut job. We're not going to deal with him. But what happened? When he was lucid and he was in his right mind, that's when they dealt with him. Right? And, they did what we call a stringent conversion, because they weren't 100% sure the conversion wasn't valid, right? It was questionable. So they made him go through another conversion. Okay. But this person was already holding, by Torah mitzvahs. So as we mentioned, there are times that the person goes off his medication, right, or this time of stress or other things, then we can understand, that this person may go off and do other things. But in that case, what's his obligation in mitzvahs? He's exempt, right? If a person thinks he's king of the world, right, or he thinks he's the Messiah, or whatever the case is, and he thinks he can, I don't know, jump off buildings and, in a single bound, whatever, he thinks he's Superman, whatever the case is, right? Even so, at that point, he's not obligated in mitzvahs, right? He's got the status of a shoita. A shoita is someone you give him money, he's going to rip it up. This guy thinks he's Superman, no different. Thinks he's the Messiah, no different, right? So he's exempt. You're not going to make him liable for mitzvahs. The guy's not in his right mind, right? He's not in his right mind. So in that case, what are we going to say? That when he's in his right mind, he's liable, right? He's got an obligation to keep Torah and mitzvahs. If he's not in his right mind, different times, okay. Now, does that mean, interesting enough, does that mean a person like that can't convert? No. If the person's really serious, but they have issues, they may have mental issues, right? They're going to have to be deemed certainly fit to convert. There's no question about that. They're probably going to have to see a psychologist if they're not seeing one already. Get an evaluation, see what the person's capable of, and then they'll make an evaluation, and then they'll make a decision. Doesn't mean they can't convert. Might be more difficult, etc. But someone like this, it's much easier if they're already born a Jew. They're already born a Jew, and they hallucinate and other things over time. Okay, right? There's a mental issue. If there's a mental issue at that point, they're not liable, right? The question is, but what if they go and do something? What if they go hurt somebody? We're gonna get to that at the end. I don't know if we're gonna get to it today, right? Maybe we'll get to it next week. We'll see. But the thing is, and we have to realize, is not every single person, even with every single illness, people handle different things. People can handle the same thing differently. They might not go through the same exact experience. And even if they have the same exact experience, does not mean they deal with it in the same way. So therefore, something that is crucial is you have to look at every individual case. Every individual case. You cannot look at it, through a vacuum. You cannot say, okay, this person has schizophrenia. We know he's got schizophrenia. But okay, we're going to diagnose him like this and like this. But you can't put him in the same class as someone else. You're not doing the same thing. Maybe it's better, maybe it's worse. Whatever the case is, you got to take a lot of different factors. You got to look at a lot of different factors. Now, there's also a recognition that mental illness can be compared to what? Something physical. Because we also understand, if you don't understand, you understand now, that something inside of us, in our minds, can affect us physically, right? Similar. Right now, modern clinical science, you can Google this, you can check it out, see if I'm bluffing or not, and that is they embrace this, right? They've done a lot of research, and they have shown that it is definitely similar to physical illness, right? Just like someone is afflicted with whatever mental illness it is, they can be healed, maybe, right? They can be healed from episodes from it. Some better, some worse, etc. And therefore, it's part of their own experience. Anyone who's ever had or gone through any type of mental illness and they've come out of it, or they have ups and downs. I know somebody that was diagnosed being bipolar, right? They've been on medication. They see a psychologist regularly, and you wouldn't even know, right? In general, you would not even know if you saw this person, they had any issues whatsoever. Now, they're on medication. Took a while to get the right medication, and all that. But if no one knew their history, you would never know. You'd absolutely never know. So now this is an interesting thing. If a person gets healed to a certain level, or even totally healed from mental illness, what do they see that as? An experience to thank God for. Now, a person can't say, well, doesn't everything emanate from God? Everything does. That is true. It does not necessarily mean that, God's the one who caused it over here. Meaning, there's a Ramban. I think there's a Ramban in the book of Job when his good friends are chastising him, right? They're chastising him, and for what's going on etc., maybe did something wrong or whatever the case is, comes along, I think it's the Ramban who says that we come along and we're going to say, we understand everything emanates from God, right? Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7, which, oddly enough, unbelievable, the Christians change what the verse means. Why? Because the verse says that God created evil. Now, the Christians change that because obviously evil comes from Mr. S, the fallen angel and all that. But according to us, God created evil. Doesn't mean he's evil, but he gives us the ability to tap in, right? He gives us the ability to tap into evil. So a person can do something. Maybe it's not good for them. And there are repercussions. There are repercussions. If a person, God forbid, is addicted to drugs can be mind altering. Person, maybe, if they're, depending what drugs they're on, can affect them their entire life, right? It can make them not only make bad decisions, but it can destroy brain cells, as they say by marijuana over time, right? I would say it's not as addictive, as other things, even though, we spoke about drugs in general, right? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That was one of the topics we hit. And, but what does it do? It makes the mind atrophy, makes the person more lethargic, right? Does it kill people? Doesn't kill people, right? Alcohol is worse. More people die from alcohol, let's say, in car crashes or whatever, certainly more than marijuana, no question. But there are other drugs that are mind altering. Now, they could be so mind altering, maybe they never get their total mind back. Maybe they, destroyed enough brain cells, over time, that's what happens, right? Sometimes more, sometimes less. Again, it depends. Depends on a lot of different factors. But what are we going to say over here? God's going to say, you know what? Okay, you went down this path. I didn't stop you. You did this, you did that, you did the other thing. I let it go. And now you're affected by it. So now, what did you do? What did you do over here? You took drugs, you took alcohol, you messed up your brain. Essentially, you messed up your brain over time. That's what you did. Now you're coming back to me and said you caused it. Well, the Ramban says, not everything we go through in life, we say, God, why'd you do it? Coffman 614th commandment, don't be stupid. Or the 615th commandment, don't be a moron. Maybe you did it yourself. Maybe you took yourself down the wrong path. Maybe, you got convinced by other people. They brought you down this wrong path, and God didn't stop you. He gave you free choice over here. He didn't stop you because you didn't want to go on the right path. You were interested in a quick fix. You wanted to make a lot of money, so you did certain things underhandedly. You got burnt. Right, 100% you got burnt. Or, let's say, you could say it differently. Let's say God was building you up in order for you to get burnt. Okay, that I understand. That you can say, well, God, why'd you do this? Could be any number of reasons. But if we did it to ourselves, the Ramban says, who do we have to blame? Nobody except ourselves. Now, there are other things that could happen based on what? Based on what our soul has to go through. So that we could say, okay, my soul had to go through X, Y, and Z. I don't know why. I have no idea why. And I told one of my rabbis once, very much steeped in Kabbalah, I said, if I ever get a hold of my soul, I'm going to grab it, whatever. And he basically told me if you looked at him in the face, in the mirror, you wouldn't recognize who he was. So I said, that's not really the point. And he said, that's exactly the point. So there's something which we don't really understand, why we have to go through things that go against our will. That we don't have a choice, right? We're not given a choice over here. So why do we have to go through it? The answer is we don't know, right? Essentially, we don't know. But the question is, okay, how are we going to deal with it? Now, trauma can come in many different forms. That can certainly bring on, abuse of certain things. That can bring on mental illness, can bring on any number of things, right? 100%, right? There's no question. The only question is someone who goes through it, and they go through depression, they go through trauma, they go through other things, what exactly is going to be their liability? Because if we understand, let's say it's not their fault, right? 100%, it's not their fault. We'll make it very easy. It's not their fault. It's against their will. If it's against their will, they don't have a choice. If they don't have a choice, and we understand, okay, God is sending this messenger for whatever reason, you're going to say, why do I have to go through it? The answer is we don't know, right? It could be not based on anything you've done. Right? Most likely, it's probably what your soul has to go through, what it has to suffer through, whatever the case is. But that's not even really the point. That's not even the point over here. The idea is that it can have physical counterparts. That science is proven. So now, so why do I mention that? Because if a person gets healed, person has mental illness, they get healed from it, part of experience, and thank God for it. Now again, it's not necessarily God who put you through this, right? It could be you did it yourself. So if mental illness is separate really from a person's normal psychological functioning, right? It's not really part and parcel of that. It's really something else. Nonetheless, what can happen? The obvious thing that can happen is it becomes part of your psyche, right? It becomes part of a person's identity. Person, let's say for example, person for a long time had a lot of money. They had a lot of money. And, some schnook comes along, invests it in the wrong way, right? And what happens? Or steals it or whatever the case is. And now you left penniless. Got no way to pay bills, right? Kind of like what happened to people in COVID. Business was shut down, couldn't pay bills, suicide rate was up and all that. Okay. There is a reality. So somebody like that, well, they lose everything. They think, okay, maybe recover this, recover that. They recover 2%. They recover 3%. But now they pretty much lost everything. They don't know what they're going to do. Could that lead to depression? 100%. This is trauma, right? This is major trauma. Not only is that major trauma, will make it real interesting. Family members around them, hands off. They could help. They're not interested. They said, oh, you're bad. It's your tough luck. So not only do you get beaten down by life, you get kicked in the face by family also, right? You can't count on family. Who can you count on? Nobody, right? But see, you're getting beaten down. What can a person do? Be bitter. And what if that person's a religious Jew? Couldn't that person say, God, why are you doing this? Why in the world did you do this? And now you're angry. You're not going to keep Torah and mitzvahs, right? Let's say a person decides they're not going to keep Torah and mitzvahs, right? In my language, it's Teflon generation. In this case, okay. This person had a trauma. But if he was okay mentally, understanding how the world works and understanding how God runs the world, and he had good backing from his rabbis and psychologists and all that, right? Is that person going to keep Torah mitzvahs? They'll more likely be able to, only because they have the background to do it, right? They have the knowledge to do it. But I always say, is that going to cure every trauma? No, right? A person may need a lot of help, may need medication, many, many things, right? So a person can overcome that. You take somebody, for instance, what's one of the greatest traumas anyone's ever gone through? The Holocaust, right? Take someone who saw his whole family die in front of them. Famous story of Rav Zev Gussman, of blessed memory, was on Rav Chaim Gruzinski's based in his rabbinical court at the age of 18. Talmudic genius. And what happened? He saw his own child killed in front of him. So he headed a yeshiva here in Jerusalem, and there were some guys, outside schmoozing when they should have been learning. And so the Rosh Yeshiva came out and asked them, said, what's going on? Yeah, life is hard. We're going to be back in a minute. We just want to chill. Life is hard. So he looked at them. How old are they? 16, 17, 18. How much do they really have to chill from? Again, I'm not saying, we're making it easy. They never need trauma, normal, grew up normal, this and that. So he says, let me ask you something. Did you ever see your own child, ripped to shreds in front of your face? Did you ever see such a thing? They turned white. They said no. Said then whatever you're going through, I'm not going to say, okay, you want to speak to me, we'll speak about it. Whatever. It didn't seem like they had major issues. All right, he understood. They just, they want to take a break or whatever. But he's saying, he's like, I went through real trauma. Right, real trauma, right? You're sitting out here saying, I want to chill. Life is heavy. You think life is heavy? That's how heavy life can be. They sort of scooted back and ran, back into the study hall. So I've heard people say, the people we should get the most strength from are the ones who have tattoos on their arm, not too many left today, the ones who survived the Holocaust intact. How can we have any claim against someone who saw their whole family, wiped out? Can't imagine. We can't imagine. The ones that had their families wiped out or lost a lot of people, and they somehow made it out alive, and they somehow made it out in strength with their faith in God intact, they're the real heroes. They're the absolute heroes over here. But at the same time, trauma is not going to be for each person, not going to be the same, even if they went through the same thing. Right? So we're not giving anyone, we're not saying, well, person went through this, they went through that. Well, guess what? Doesn't matter. You still have to pray 3 times a day. They're going to say, come on, I have enough trouble getting out of bed. I have enough trouble dealing with things on a daily basis. In that case, there's a serious trauma. God's going to have mercy. God's going to say, you're exempt over here. Maybe from most things, when it comes to prayer, and all these other things. But at the same time, mental health issues can create in myriad ways meaning, right? There's meaning in struggle. Now, some people think maybe I was just born like the Christians say, that JC came to this world. Don't worry, you believe in him and that's good. But there are a lot of people who've had struggles, serious struggles. Whether it's with, illness, mentally challenged children, whatever it is, and they've created tremendous meaning. They've derived unbelievable meaning going through their struggles. Or they've derived meaning, let's say they didn't have those struggles. Other people did, and they see how they came through it. Imagine someone, goes through a major trauma. Okay, doesn't mean they didn't suffer. They suffered tremendously. Now, let's say somehow they came out of it. They're pretty much, intact, for less than a better word. And they are functioning. Doesn't mean they don't necessarily have issues. Someone can look at them and say, wow, I didn't go through this. I didn't have this. This person's a hero. This person's a tremendous hero. How did you deal with this? And how did you deal with that? And how did you come through that? Other people, whatever it is, they can be decimated. And I'm not going to say it's not normal. It's a normal thing. They certainly can be decimated. The only question is, how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to see it from God's vantage point? And are we going to serve, are we going to look at it and say, okay, what did I gain from it? Did I gain nothing from it? Am I, was I just there to suffer? Why should I have had to go through that? Other people didn't have to go there. These are legitimate questions. They're 100% legitimate questions. And even with the greatest background in Jewish philosophy, if I didn't have great people behind me, would have crumbled. Would have crumbled years ago. Many, many years ago. Could have been very bitter. I know somebody still very bitter. Had a business and they told him to open another franchise. Open up another franchise, didn't do so well, took the whole business, went under. And he's still bitter. Person's still angry. Got bad advice. Not only did he get bad advice, or seemingly bad advice, as we say is what God wanted to happen, without going into all that. So what, at the very least, you go through something like that, maybe you're going to have families going to rally around. Even if they can't help you physically, they'll help you mentally. They'll help you pick up the pieces. They'll be there for you. But if you don't have that, and you get kicked in the face, you just lost everything. Now you have nothing, and you have to start from scratch to clear bankruptcy and all this. I understand. I understand where the anger lies. But at some point, you got to deal with the anger. Because, this person's still angry. Still angry. Right? And, you ask them about it, and still, yell and curse and scream and family this and family that and all that. No connection to his family. Okay? It's his choice. Right? Everyone makes a choice. We're not saying that's not tragic. That's not traumatic. What's the difference? Difference is how you deal with it. But not all trauma is equal. That's for sure. Especially if things are done by underhanded individuals or individuals that we respect. Right? Even in the Torah world. I'll give one example. Right? Imagine, and I know of a story of somebody that's, 15, 16 years old, the head of his yeshiva embarrassed him in public for whatever reason. Right? Obviously, embarrassing someone in public is bad. You lose your portion of the world to come. But whatever, maybe you lost his school, maybe you did something. I don't know. Whatever it was. So this person is the head of a yeshiva. He's not just, a peer. He's not just necessarily one of his rabbis, he's the head of the yeshiva. Now, if one of his rabbis did, it could also be just as bad, right? But this person got demolished, got totally destroyed. So what did he say? What did he say? He said, that's it, I'm done. I'm done with Judaism, right? I'm opting out. If this is what Torah represents, if this is what someone can do, this is what someone has the power to do, I don't want to have anything to do with it. So again, it's going to depend on what the issue is. We're going to speak about a few of them, and we're not going to get to it now. But, the idea is, what it is, how it's dealt with, and even if it's very hard to deal with, it could be that a person has good days and bad days. And when a person has a bad day, they're not liable for anything, right? I'm not going to say they're schizophrenic, right? But they're in a mental state where, God's out of the picture. They're in a mental state, they can't make blessings. They're in a mental state, they can't do a lot of things that they're obligated to do. They're 100% exempt. 100% exempt. Again, it's going to depend on each individual case. But even so, God's going to cut them some slack, because how can he expect them to do something that goes against their total nature? Right? If a person, is depressed, they can't get out of bed. They can't do certain things, because of what they've gone through. And they're still going through, they're still going through therapy. They're still on medication. When they're having that type of difficulty, they're exempt. When they feel better and they're up to things, okay, then they're going to be obligated, right? They're going to be obligated. Now, the question really is, which we're not going to, obviously we're not going to get to, because A, you're not going to give me any more time, and you started late. But even if I started on time, I still wouldn't have gone to it because of the lot here. And that is, how do we include God in a person's journey? Because if we really understand it emanates from him, and at some point either he put us in this situation, or we did it, or he helped, or whatever the case is, right? So, we have to take that into account. And and we're going to have to see, exactly where that goes. How has a person themselves have gone through trauma, and other things. I can tell my own personal story, do that next week, and how a person deals with that, and how they view what other people went through. Maybe they didn't go through it, or maybe they went through certain things, other people went through other things, and they'll see how they dealt with it, and how they stayed intact or not, right? But, somebody who's gone through, certain things, there's no question, as we mentioned before, there's no question of apathy. There's no question of anger. There's no question of lack of pleasure. There's no question of lack of emotion over here. So could God really expect me to sing and dance, when I've been beaten down so bad? He's not going to expect that unless the person somehow is able to overcome that. Or at some level. Maybe they're not going to come at 100%. Maybe even 30%. Maybe even 40%. People say I have good days and bad days. Right? They have good days and bad days. So on the good days, that's when they pray. That's when they do mitzvahs. And on the bad days, they're exempt 100%. But we're going to have to see, by individual cases. And, we'll speak, I guess, more about that next week, because I know I'm out of time and you're not going to give me any more time. So that's it. We're going to stop there.
All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Rabbi, for your time. And we'll look forward to seeing you guys same time, same place next week, Hashem willing. Y'all have a great week. Thank you, Rabbi.